Hello everyone, I am Tushar Katarki. I am the Director of Product Management for Percona. I am here to talk about high availability options for MySQL in OpenStack. So this is the agenda. Introduction to high availability, we'll just cover like a slide on that just so that we level set each other. Then we'll talk about OpenStack HA. And the high availability and scalability considerations for OpenStack. Then we'll talk about MySQL HA options, which is obviously the core piece here. We'll start with multi-master replication with Galera, and move on to MySQL Cluster, which is based on NDB, and MySQL Replication, which is just a master-slave replication. Although you could do multi-master, but we'll not cover that. And then we'll do some kind of outside shared storage type of replication for MySQL. And we'll summarize with Q&A. Well, obviously, we're not going to have a live Q&A because of the thing, but we'll just do summary, and then we'll take questions later. Okay, without further ado, this is kind of a level set slide. What is high availability? When we talk about high availability, we should be always thinking about availability of a service. It's really not about the subsystem. You got to think end to end. And what is high availability? What is availability? It's basically service uptime, right? So high availability systems seek to minimize the system downtime, obviously, as well as data loss. That's kind of as a level set. So in OpenStack, high availability in OpenStack context means protecting against single points of failure and cascading of failures. This could be networking systems, it could be your application or compute, it could be data, your storage and your databases, or it could be your facilities in your data center, such as power and air conditioning. OpenStack achieves 99.99% HA for infrastructure. I think that's, I believe, about 5 minutes in a year. So that's, or maybe it's an hour. So it's less than a day. It's 5 minutes to an hour if we do the math. But and HA, you can think about HA for stateless versus stateful services. And in HA, in OpenStack, some services are stateless and some are stateful, and so you got to think about that. And then you have got to think about active-active versus active-passive. Active-active is really kind of more preferable because you don't need a both the there's no it's a hot you can both the sites in an active-active both the nodes or all the nodes in your cluster can participate in serving up the load, and so there's amount of scalability available, whereas in active-passive, the passive node really doesn't participate in anything. So in general, active is preferable. And this kind of leads into my next point, which is about scaling. It's kind of relatively, scaling and high availability go hand in hand. You can achieve high availability, in my mind, relatively easier unless you want to actually scale. And so in OpenStack, you got to do both. You got to have both those considerations. MySQL HA. Let's start with the MySQL HA options. There is a multi-master with Galera, like I said. This is based on Percona XDB cluster and cluster control. Well, first of all, multi-master with Galera is just Galera is a open source software, and what Percona has done is that it has taken that and it has integrated it with another company called Cluster Control, which makes a GUI and makes it easy to deploy, and that will be Percona XDB cluster with Cluster Control. Then we talk about MySQL Cluster, which is NDB, MySQL Replication, and I'm going to skip through this in the interest of time and get into it. So what is MySQL HA with Galera? So this is synchronous replication. So by synchronous replication, I think most of us understand it, but to level set, an application writes or reads, a write has to go all the way and be stored in before it is act back to the application in the database, before it's act back to the application. That's the idea of synchronous replication. And shared nothing really means that you are not using any shared storage or shared memory or anything like that to achieve high availability. It's multi-master writing, so you could actually, if it's in a Galera cluster, you could actually write to multiple nodes, and they can all participate at the same time. The only distinction I would say is that it's not sharding. That's the only, it's just, it's the same copy of the database which is there on all the nodes. So actually a write gets duplicated on all the nodes, whereas the reads can be from any node. So what that means, the other thing also is you can automatically join and leave the cluster. A node can come in and join a Galera cluster, and it will, what is known as, either get a synchronous state transfer or an incremental state transfer, depending on how much lag there was between the last time it had joined. So the nice thing about that is that I mean, as nodes come in and out, they can be used for two purposes. One is high availability, right? If something goes down, you have the other nodes to take care of and provide high availability. But the other advantage, like I said, is scaling too. You can kind of use this to auto scale. And in terms of scaling, it's really good to scale like this for read performance. I mean, and you can keep kind of adding nodes. And so I'd say it's great read scaling. Write scaling is kind of okay. I mean, it's not, I mean, write scaling is actually tends to be much more complex. So like I said, since the write has to be duplicated on all the nodes, the write scaling really is not as good as the read scaling. So the other thing that you need to use for this to really work is HA proxy for kind of load balancing your reads or writes. So something to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is I mean, at least from Percona's point of view, we only support InnoDB right now, and we consider MyISM as experimental at this point. And so, but most people should be using InnoDB. That's a sense, so I think that should be fine. And one thing that, and if you have heard some talks here, there was one by my colleague Peter Boros on OpenStack MySQL deep dive. And I've heard this other times, this question comes up, right? There are deadlocks and all that. There have been some discussions on that. And that's why I want to what I want to point out really is that the Galera, MySQL HA with Galera is based on a kind of a greedy algorithm. So there are certain patterns which I would say it works very well for many patterns, but there are certain patterns which it doesn't actually work very well. And this includes patterns wherein there are actually multiple writes happening to the same row. And so those, and if they are happening on different nodes, that's not really a good pattern. If it's because it's going to keep, since the greedy algorithm, it'll think that it can write, and then that node thinks the same thing too, and suddenly there are all kinds of contentions happening, which means there are timeouts and quote unquote. Here, they manifest in OpenStack as deadlock, but they're really not deadlock. I mean, you just have to retry. Anyway, so this is all free and open source, like I said. So what we have done with Percona, really at Percona, what we have done is we have taken Percona server, which is really a drop-in replacement with performance optimizations kind of out of the box for MySQL, and some enterprise features such as audit plug. We have an audit plugin and PAM authentication and so on and so forth. And we have added DBA tools, again, such as, we have something called the PT Query Digest, which lets you do slow log queries and analyze that. So this is all free and open source. And what we do is that we combine that with Galera. I don't know, I think that particular sentence, I've removed it, but we combine that with Galera, and so that gives you Percona XDB cluster. It's available, we have distros for Ubuntu Debian and RHEL and CentOS, and obviously we distribute a source code also. So, and we are certified on RHEL OSP as well as on Ubuntu, and we are actually part of Ubuntu, I think, 14.04 onwards. and LTS. So cluster control. So what's cluster control? Cluster control is actually by a company called Several Lines, who is a partner of ours, and they do a GUI and API. So I get the 2-minute warning here. So anyways, so I got to move fast, but I think this is a very popular option around here in OpenStack, Galera, and PXC. So it's good that I covered this. The other option really for HA with MySQL Cluster is to use what is MySQL cluster for high availability. It uses an in-memory cluster storage engine called NDB. It's kind of very similar at least in functionality with respect to Galera. Right? It also does synchronous replication with shared nothing, multi-master, and local reads. Nodes can automatically join and leave, like I said before. The one thing that it also does is that it has automatic sharding support, which is something that is not available with Galera. Performance, what I'm told is the performance is great for the write patterns, but it requires a commercial license. So the other option is this is your traditional HA with MySQL replication, and I work for Percona, and these guys are like they've done MySQL for quite some time, or for a lot of cases this sometimes just simply works. This is your typical master-slave asynchronous replication in which you only write to the master, and then after some time there's a different process which kind of replicates it to the slave. It's very good, and you can do cascaded slaves to get great read scaling. Obviously, there's no write scaling with this. You can either do manual failover or an automatic failover, and you need to use HA proxy for load balancing or pacemaker or some kind of or heartbeat for WIP management. What we have done at Percona is that we have something called Percona Replication Manager, which is kind of a nice GUI-based thing which uses pacemaker and HA proxy, and it kind of helps you do automatic failovers. Or you can use something like MySQL HA. It's latency tolerant, so it's good for long distance because asynchronous, especially if you have a smaller pipe. You can go there. This is your traditional. This is another outside. This is a type of replication that you can do outside with shared storage, such as DRDB. The nice thing about this is it's kind of simple. Requires a pair of servers. This is traditional way of how to provide HA. There is no scaling, though. You cannot do scaling with this unless you kind of do shards of pairs. So. And it requires requires MySQL. So since this is shared storage or DRDB PD, the MySQL on the other side has to come up for you to get service back. So the failure has to be manual automatic. So anyways, in summary, MySQL HA options, we looked at MySQL with Galera, and this works with MariaDB too, by the way. PXC, which is Percona XDB cluster, which is something from Percona, but based on the same technology. And it's good for low latency. MySQL replication is good for high latency environments, you could do replication outside MySQL also. And obviously, needless to say, you got to consider MySQL HA in the context of the entire OpenStack HA. It goes back to how HA is at a service level, and not at a component level. Some additional resources: we have a November 12th webinar. Just Google search it for more details in depth about Percona XDB cluster for MySQL. Then we have the OpenStack high availability guide, and then there's a nice comparison between MySQL clustering and MySQL replication and DRDB that the folks at MySQL have written, and so you can go and take a look at that. With that, I will thank you.